Hello and welcome to the Opus WealthStyle podcast. Yeah, I'm your host today, Evan Wohl, and happy to be joined by Hal Hershfield. Hal, how you doing today?
Good. I'm so happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. I first met you, Hal, or at least saw you speak at a conference. I guess it was about a year ago, maybe a little more than that, at the Currents conference, if you remember. And I was just enthralled with your work and just really interested in not only the coming book, but also just having a conversation with you. So why don't we start by, instead of me doing a half-assed introduction, maybe just tell the audience yourself, a little bit about your work, what you're doing, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, right on. So I'm a professor of psychology, marketing, and behavioral decision making at UCLA's Anderson School of Management. And so a lot of what I do is study why people have a hard time doing the things that they say they want to do,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to financial decisions.
Such a simple concept, right? Everybody knows, I should exercise every day and eat healthy and, save money for the future. And we don't all do that. And you've done extensive work over your career on, I guess, do you think of it as kind of life hacks on, just helping make better decisions, even if they are smaller ones?
Yeah, I really like that term. I think it's smart because sometimes we think, oh, we've got to make these, huge changes to our lives in order to
Yeah.
get to where we want to be. And of course, that's that's really hard to do. And we might have the motivation, but then to like actually go through with it is hard. So a lot of what I've done and a lot of what other behavioral scientists have done is to try to figure out what are the quote unquote easier ways to help people help themselves. And
Hmm.
I don't want to put too much emphasis on easy because none of these things are
It's
easy, so
easier
to
though.
say.
It's
Easier. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. It's so you, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was through some fMRI studies that you actually found that the way people think about their future selves is more akin to someone else than it is their selves. How did I do on that summary? Maybe you could expand on that.
You did a great job on that summary. That's the gist. One of my early research studies used fMRI, functional MRI, to basically look at what happens in the brain when people think of their future selves. And one of the things that we found is that the brain activity that arises when we think of our future selves is more on par with the brain activity that arises when we think about other people, which is in some ways it's striking because it really suggests that on some level our future selves may seem like other people.
I absolutely. And if you think, and if you just do a simple think about yourself a month ago or a month from now, it's you, right? Like I don't have any like it's easy. Obviously, it's easy to see in the past, but it's also like a month from now, my life's not going to be. It's likely, hopefully, not going to be that much different than it is today. But 20, 30 years out into the future, like I totally get it. Like, and one of the things I loved about your book, at least I think this was in your book. Maybe I got it somewhere else, but about the boat that gets every piece of it replaced over. Is that in your book? Good.
Yes.
So the concept is, and I'm sure you could do it better, but the concept is you start with the boat, you name it Mary or Saint Mary, whatever you're going to name it, and over time, over a long period of time, every inch of that boat, every floorboard, every nut and bolt gets replaced over time. And if 100% of the pieces get replaced in 10, 20, 30 years, however long it takes, is it the same boat? Is it the same boat when it was started? Doesn't have any of the same pieces. It's got the same name. And so is it the same boat? And, I don't think there's any firm answer on that, right? But I just love just to think about that for ourselves, because
Yeah.
our selves are always changing, right? Like our thoughts are always changing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the philosophers call this, the problem of Theseus's ship, and it's exactly right. You can think about it with boats, and it's just a fun sort of philosophical thought experiment. But then you start applying that same idea to ourselves, and it becomes really sort of mind-boggling to say, well, yeah, the cells in my body have changed over. Like,
Yeah.
your name might have changed. You live in a different city. Are you the same, quote unquote, as you
Yeah.
used to be? And what about when it comes to the years in the future? Will you be the same? And it's a very hard question to ask and answer.
Yeah. but a good one to think about nonetheless. Let's since
Exactly.
we're a finance, generally finance podcast, to do other topics, but let's talk about the financial aspect of this. And so you've stated that the people who are more closely aligned with their future selves have amassed more money. You've commented that the auto enroll for 401k has been incredibly successful. We can speak a little bit about that. I'm curious, first of all, if you could just speak to those concepts, like why is it that people who feel more closer aligned with their future selves have made, I guess, what I would consider to be better decisions or amassed more money? And then on the 401k, the auto enroll on the 401k front, what are some other life examples we can apply that to?
Sure. So there's a couple things at play here. So one is, yeah, we've found that people who feel more of a sense of overlap or similarity, emotional connection with their future selves, have accumulated more assets over time. Part of that, part of the thinking there is that, well, if I feel a closer relationship with my future self, I may be willing to do more things now to help them later. And that's, there's all sorts of, we can get into the nuance, but that sort of relationship holds when you take into account things like age and education. We also probably need to recognize that these things sort of operate together, right? So if I amass more savings, I may end up feeling more connected to my future self and vice versa, right? But
because you're
we're
more
really more interested
optimistic
in
about your
saying
future. Is that kind of the idea?
you probably become more optimistic, most likely you're stable. You also
Hal,
are older, right? So I mean, we
Hal,
know that as people age,
Hal.
yes.
Yeah, you kind of dropped off there for a couple of seconds.
Yeah,
So can you start over
sure.
with answering that question?
Which
Give it
one?
your best.
Sorry,
So I think
What was the last question you asked, Evan, about how it's
how I think that when I left off with how the 401k auto enroll can translate to other areas of our lives.
Yeah, and so then there's kind of two questions there. Okay, so right, there's a couple of interesting questions here. So one is that why are people who are more connected to their future selves accumulating more assets? So this is one of the things we find is that the people who feel a stronger sense of similarity and overlap with their future selves have accumulated more financial assets. In theory, part of the reason that this happens is that if I have a stronger relationship with future me, I'm more willing to do things today to make their life better off. And you can easily think of how that applies in the spending and saving space. Now, you also asked about auto enrollment in 401ks, and now you put these things together. One of the things we know from a few decades of behavioral science is that if we automatically enroll someone in a 401k, in other words, I make the default that someone is enrolled and they have to then choose to opt out, they're drastically more likely to be enrolled. This is
to
contribute
because they don't have to make any change, make a decision to not contribute. In fact, they would have to take an action to not contribute.
Exactly. It's kind of all about where the inertia lies. If the inertia, if the status quo is that I'm already enrolled, then I'd rather stick with the status quo. If the status quo is that I'm not enrolled and I have to take an action to enroll, then well, it's easier to just
it's what you said. It's easier. It's easier to just leave it alone. And
exactly. Now, where you sort of mix the two topics that we've been discussing here is that even if I'm an employer and I auto enroll my employees, I still have to make a decision about what is the appropriate contribution rate to auto enroll them at, right? In other words, I can say, yes, you're involved, but are you involved at a 3% contribution rate, a 4, 5, 6, whatever it may be? What's my employer match? There's all sorts of questions that arise here. Some employers have thought, well, if I start a little bit lower, maybe that'll increase the likelihood that people will stay involved and then gradually bump them up over time. Well, another way to think about this is if I auto enroll you at 3 or 4% and I want you to get to 5, 6, 7% even, then trying to enhance the bond that you feel with your future self, that may be a motivational tool that I can get to help bridge the gap between where I've auto enrolled you and where I ultimately want you to be, or where ultimately maybe you as the employee have told me separately that you would like to be saving more. Okay, so now there's
Sure.
still a gap there, and I
Yeah.
can try to close it.
But going from 0 to 8 is probably a bit much.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big shift, you know.
Yeah.
This is also, by the way, this is also why auto escalation works really well. Auto escalation being, you know, I get you to increase your rate, not now, but at your next pay raise. And so you don't feel it as much because your paycheck may stay relatively
That's
similar.
your future self will deal with that.
Oh, but yeah, you know, let
Yeah.
him deal with it.
That's right. That's right. Speaking of, multiple times throughout the book, the concept came back of writing a letter to your future self, video to your future self, or one of the stories I absolutely loved was, and I don't want to give away too much of the book. The book was phenomenal. Everyone, please go out and buy it or pre-order it. And I should add that the first 10 people to reach out to myself will get a free copy of the book. So first 10 anyway. So, but one of the forget the name of the gentleman, but correct me if I'm wrong, he became sick and he started feverishly writing letters to his family, only to be open on future dates, such as the day he died, the day they got married, the day they had kids. And I love that concept. I mean, just what a cool concept.
Yeah, Arnie Johansson, he got diagnosed with ALS, and he was
ALS.
writing all these letters, even to the point where he couldn't physically move. He was dictating them to a nurse. His kid at the time, Ryan, didn't really even know what he was doing. But then the day Arnie died, Ryan not only discovers his dad, but then about 10 minutes later, his mom hands him this letter, and it's a letter from his dad basically saying, I know this is going to be a hard day. Here's all the things I want to tell you. And over he's now in his late 40s, I think, the son.
Yeah.
And he's still getting these letters occasionally.
Is he really?
For milestones that, now he's older than his father was when his father died. So this has led him to create a company called Ever Present that makes the process of doing this sort of, well, now this is videos to to future offspring. I just love the concept.
I get chills when I think of that. I have 3 young kids, so just the lesson. And now I don't think I'm like some, have this enormous wealth of knowledge, but like, I'm sure I've got some messages that I would like to impart on my children and even my future self. When I read it in the book, or it was partway through the book, and I put it on my calendar to write a letter to my future self. I didn't get around to doing it, and I still feel like it's a big undertaking, right? Because I'm not going to spend 20 minutes on it. Like I'm going to spend, likely hours, many drafts, whether it's to my future self, kids, or whoever.
Well, I can I jump in there. I think that is such an interesting thing, right? And that was to some extent the impetus for Ryan Johansson to create Ever Present, because he tried to do the same thing. He tried to write a letter. He couldn't do it. Then he tried to do a video, and he said he sort of breaks. He broke down, and the whole time, and it was just like he couldn't get through it. He's actually chief of police of a small city in California.
Interesting.
And he's used police interrogation techniques to help make the process of writing the quote unquote letter, making the video easier, so that it's not like you have to sit down and write, spend hours doing this thing, but like he gives prompts to say, here are the questions I want to ask you about quick, and I think the thinking here is that far better to have you do a 10-minute or 15-minute video that's got some of the highlights than to never do the video, because you're waiting for the period when you have 6 hours. Who ever has that?
Exactly. No, you're so right. Why try and reinvent the wheel? I'm just going to go to Ever Present. It's everpresent.com, right? I'm going to do that. I will do that. So thank you for that. One of the things you also wrote about it was you put on like the VR glasses, right? And look at their future selves. I think that's such an interesting concept, not just because I'm kind of like into tech and VR kind of stuff, but now, fast forward that like 3 years, 5 years, when it's like actually going to be realistic, like when it'll actually look like you, like kind of a scary way. It's like, you really feel like you're gonna, just don't let that artificial intelligence, get out into the world, I think.
I know it's crazy because I mean, when I started doing this stuff with these quote unquote age progression techniques,
Yeah.
that I mean, it was really basic, and it's like
Right.
I in fact yesterday my wife and I were cleaning out our garage and we came across some like a newspaper clipping that had some of these images in them. This is from about 13 years ago, and it had an image of like what I would look like in my mid 40s, which I now am.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my
I did
wife
too.
sort of, yeah, it was like my wife didn't miss a beat. And she's like, wow, you look a lot older now. But I think now the technology is so much better that it's,
Right.
yeah,
And
it's
it's only
gonna
getting
be,
better. Like in a couple
yeah.
years, it's just going to be wild.
Oh my God, maybe even less, right?
Yeah. Well, I've really enjoyed just the thought experiment more than anything of your future self and what I can do, what we can do to help make better decisions. Are there, before we jump, are there any like key points that you want to make sure that people hear about, or that you think would help them in this endeavor?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things to keep in mind here. So one, we've talked about the sort of age progression and the letters and videos. I think the key point here is not the technique itself, but the sort of machinery, what's happening underneath the hood. The idea here is to try to make our future selves as vivid and as vivid and as emotional as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, I think especially in the financial advisor side, there's this tendency to think that the way I can get you to think emotionally about the future is to show you, the compound interest graph.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that is emotional to people who work with numbers
In analytics, yeah.
and analytics, but that probably to many people is not that emotional. It's
Yeah.
it's dry, it's stats, it's a picture, it's a graph. But anything we can do to make the self more vivid, that's the type of thing that gets me to really connect to the person I'm going to be, and then to try to take some actions now that will make life a little bit better in the years to come.
I love it. I think, I appreciate the book. I appreciate all your work. Again, the book is called Your Future Self, How to Make Tomorrow Better Today. Please, reach out. You're going to get some free copies. So, Hal, if people want to learn more about you and, what you're up to, where should they go?
Yeah, sure. You can, of course, find me on LinkedIn or Twitter, but also just go to halhershfield.com, and all the info about the book and my research is there. And I'm always happy to connect with folks. Thanks so much for doing this.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for coming on. And to you, the listening audience, always appreciate you. If you wouldn't mind, give us a like, subscribe, 5-star comments, wherever, all the good stuff. And we read and appreciate every one of it. We'll talk to you next time.